Hi, and welcome back to the next part of the lesson on Hitler's rise to power. Now, in this part of the lesson, we will focus exclusively on Hitler's abilities and how his abilities essentially help him to rise to power. So it will be this portion here that we are looking at. Okay. Now, before we start the lesson, I think it's important to give you guys a little bit of contextual understanding that will help you to better understand Hitler. Now, the first thing is to understand that Hitler was actually in prison due to trying to overthrow the Weimar Republic in what we call the Munich Beer Hall Putsch. Now, let me just bring up my pen. Now, the Beer Hall Putsch, which can be found on page 78 of your textbook for greater details, was an attempt by Adolf Hitler to overthrow the Weimar Republic. So basically, he went to one of the beer halls and gave a rousing address and rousing speech trying to rouse up the Germans to follow him and march up to the Reichstag and overthrow the government, and he actually promptly got arrested, as you can see in this picture. It's actually a picture frame from a movie on Hitler, and he was actually put in prison for given a 5-year sentence, of which he actually served 9 months. Now, what's important is that during this period of time, he actually wrote what we call Mein Kampf, a book that really gave an insight into his thoughts and ideas of how to govern Germany and what Germany actually needed to rise up again. And in Math Camp, which is my struggle in English translation, there were four main pointers that he brought up. He introduced the concept of National Socialism, which is having intense loyalty to Germany, accepting the idea of racial purity, and wanting equality and the state control of the economy. The second point, which is, I think, more prevalent and more important for all of us to remember, was he introduced the concept of the Aryan, or what we call the pure German master race. And this, of course, would lead to the idea of racism. The concept of the Aryan race is the idea that there is a purebred German, usually founded on physical characteristics, having blonde hair, blue eyes, very chiseled jawlines, and something that is run or passed through generations through the blood. And they saw themselves as superior, both physically, mentally, right, spiritually as well, against the other races. And this was particularly useful for Hitler because it allowed him to designate other races as scapegoats. And it's also very useful for a society that was looking for others to blame for the plight that they had. Point number three, introduce the concept of Lebensraum, which is the idea of creating living space. Now, this has nothing to do with the living room that you are living in. It's more of the idea of expanding the German Empire. So in his book, he actually gave the concept or the idea that Germany should expand its territories to include countries like Poland, Russia, even Austria-Hungary, which was prevented by the Treaty of Versailles. And the whole idea was to expand Germans' territory and the empire so that they would gain more resources, they would gain greater prestige, and bring back the old days of glory. And lastly, which was a very pointed attack on the weaknesses of the Weimar government, was the idea of a strong government, led, of course, by the Führer himself. And a strong government that could make effective decisions without needing to listen or pander to various groups at any one point of time. So if you look at these 4 points, you realize that they are attractive, yes, especially to any German who was struggling at this period of time, looking for order, looking for discipline, looking for employment, looking for work. And this book really gave birth to what we would see Adolf Hitler try to achieve with the Nazi Party. And it is from this case that we would understand that Hitler would also realize during his time in prison that to gain power in Germany would necessitate him to gain it through legitimate, or what we call legal means. He could not overthrow the Weimar Republic, it would only land him in jail. And he realized, as seen in this letter to his friend in 1924. So I'll give you a few minutes, a short time to read this. So as seen in this letter to his friend in 1924, he agreed that it was no longer possible to use weapons of force to achieve power. Instead, the Nazi Party had to use peaceful means to enter the Reichstag. By entering the Reichstag, it means to become a genuine party that contends for power, that wins votes in the general elections. And he felt, or he learned, that the Nazi Party must gain a majority, and to do that, you must win the allegiance of the German people. And that is what we're going to focus on. How did Hitler achieve that? What were the ways he did it? Okay, so number one, I think everybody agrees that Hitler had great charisma and oratorical skills. By oratorical skills refers to his ability to speak in public. He spoke really well, probably much about 1,000 times better than I do. And he had a magnetic personality, a charismatic speaker who had incredible energy. All right. And right now I'm going to show you how sometimes if you actually Google different sources online, you can find some interesting articles. And I'm going to pull up one right now that comes from the Business Insider. And this is on why Hitler was such a successful orator. All right. And there's some interesting facts that, pardon the advertisements, but there's some interesting facts that I thought it's interesting for us to learn. First, that Hitler actually had a speech writing process. So he didn't just go on stage and speak off the cuff. He was a very diligent speaker, and he actually prepared his own speeches. So Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, wrote in his diary that Hitler was known to write his own speeches and edit them up to 5 times. That's a huge amount of editing. He would work deep into the night, several evenings running, occupying 3 secretaries, taking dictation straight into typewriters before correcting the drafts. And he did not rely on anyone to write his speeches. So everything that you hear from Hitler was personal. And I think that gave a lot of power to how he addressed speeches. So let's listen to how his voice is considered to be mesmeric. All right, and if I'm not wrong, I have a sound cloud that's found here. So let's attempt to listen to it.
Jede Stunde, an jedem Tag, nur zu denken an Deutschland, an Volk und an Reich, an unsere deutsche Nation. Unser deutsches Volk siegt ein! 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 Sieg ein! Sieg ein!
All right, so I think that gave a very good example of how he was able to control basically the public mass. All right, very powerful speech. Even if you don't understand what he was actually talking about, you will understand that basically the way he spoke had a very commanding presence. And one thing that you might not have actually realized was that he was actually quite a good thespian, or what we call a good speaker on stage as well. So here are some images essentially of Adolf Hitler actually captured by a photographer in 1925 and actually not released until recently that showed that Hitler actually worked on his delivery, his hand gestures and his body language while practicing his speeches. All right, so you can see some right here, him finger pointing, look at his animated facial expressions, look at the way he gestures. Yeah, so in essence, I think Adolf Hitler was a great speaker. He also chose the right time to speak to people. He knew how to gauge the mood of the audience, their concerns, and he often spoke not in hard to understand concepts, but he actually spoke to people's desires, people's needs, provided them with solutions, provided scapegoats for people to blame. Went to the beer halls where people were often intoxicated, where people were more susceptible to being easily swayed, and his ability to speak basically made him very sincere to people, uh, made him look like that he could be someone trusted upon and someone who could bring Germany basically to the next stage or the next part. And this is a good image that you see, another source that comes in the 1930s. Apologize for the grainy details. But notice that when Adolf Hitler is speaking, right? That's where he is down here. Okay, let me just pull up my pen. Yeah. Notice basically how intense basically the attention of everyone towards him. Right? He could mesmerize people simply by his ability to be present. All right. So Hitler's charisma and oratorical skills were one of the big reasons, or the first fundamental reason that I think any of you, when writing your essays on Hitler's abilities, should include. I think any fair-weathered history student would understand that this is a particularly important concept that you would need to include when talking about Hitler's abilities. Now, the second, which is really interesting, is that Hitler also reorganized the Nazi Party. Um, and I think he did this because he wanted to ensure that the Nazi Party had appeared like a disciplined unit amidst the chaos, right, and the problems that the um, German society have. This is what he intended to do, what he achieved, wanted to accomplish.